أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، بارئ الخلائق أجمعين، باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الخلق وأعز المرسلين، حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين، سيما بقية الله روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء. قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. كلا بل لا تكرمون اليتيم ولا تحاضون على طعام المسكين وتأكلون التراث أكلا لما وتحبون المال حبا جما. كلا إذا دكت الأرض دكا دكا وجاء ربك والملك صفا صفا. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our efforts and increase our rewards and raise our status as we gather to remember Imam Hadi alayhi salam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the opportunity to learn from him, from his school, from the school of Ahlul Bayt, and follow them and gain their intercession, insha'Allah. As it is the tradition, our custom, on Thursday night we try to reflect on our journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and purify and improve in our ethics and morals, as ultimately that is the way of purification, to have better akhlaq. In the hadith we are told, هَلِ الدِّينُ إِلَّا الْأَخْلَاقِ. Is religion anything other than akhlaq? Being ethical, being moral in our relationships with everyone and everything that stems from our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately. If we improve our relationship with God and we are more God conscious, ultimately that would make us better with everyone and everything around us. That is an ethical individual. In fact, it is important that we reflect on our journey and realize that it is a journey, and remember that sooner or later we will be departing this part of the journey, which is al-hayat ad-dunya, the life on this lower part of our existence, lesser and lower in that sense, less significant, which is this material life that we're living. Our soul and body are merged into this being that we are in this short-lived journey, and we need to always constantly remind ourselves of that, and that would change our perspective on everything in life. One of the examples from the life of Imam Hadi alayhi salam in this very regard when Al-Mutawakkil, La'natullah alayh, brought the Imam to his castle. And although these people were supposedly, and we say that in inverted commas, the Khulafa of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the term Khalifa they gained from being the Khalifa of Rasulullah, and meaning like they're succeeding the Prophet, so they're supposedly the representative of the Prophet. We, as the followers of Ahlul Bayt, we reject anyone who was simply chosen by people or through a war and killing others became the Khalifa. We rather accept Khilafah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to be a divine concept, appointed by God, and therefore it would be people who are most purified and resemble Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to be his Khalifa. Nonetheless, at that time, from Bani al-Abbas, there was a Khalifa by the name of Mutawakkil, very ruthless Khalifa he was. In fact, Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam was living in Medina before he was summoned, and they made sure they brought him to Surra Marra'a or Samarra, the place of his burial and the burial of his son Imam al-Askari alayhi salam, and the place where the Imam of our time was last seen, or before his minor and then later on the major occultation, al-Ghayb al-Sughra and al-Ghayb al-Kubra. Before then, this was where the Imam was born. Nonetheless, when Mutawakkil brought him there, obviously the intention was to make sure that he has less interaction with the people, because in Medina, anyone who goes to Hajj, after Hajj they go to Ziyarah, or before Hajj they go to Ziyarah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is the tradition that the Prophet himself said when he told the people it would be unfair of them to come to Hajj and not to visit him in Medina, knowing that he would be buried in Medina. And therefore Sunni and Shia, lovers of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as part of their pilgrimage to Mecca, or to this Hajj pilgrimage once a year, they make sure that they visit Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, despite the efforts of the haters, the Wahhabi and the Saudi regime are nothing but haters of Rasulullah. And you see what they're doing in that part of the land, though they call the king there the protector of the two holy shrines. You see nothing but the destroyer of the holy shrines and the holy sites. We see day after day how they're destroying all the sites that are there, and including the Baqi' that they initially destroyed. And they also nowadays are changing the religion of God, and under the pretense of modernizing the country, they're destroying the entire religion and the shape or the form of the religion from one extreme to another. They were in one extreme, and then now they're going to another extreme. And we say Islam is the balanced path, neither extreme, neither killing people for the sake of implementation of the religion forcibly, nor killing people because they're criticizing you about changing or bringing about freedom and so on. Neither method and neither way are godly. Nonetheless, Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam was then brought from Medina to the city of Samarra, and every now and then they were worried about him. They would search his house, worried about, because they knew that the Imams of Ahlul Bayt had followers amongst the elite, amongst the army leaders and other educated members of the society. So they were worried about the popularity and the fame of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. Oftentimes they would send, in fact they employed non-Arabs in the army for that very reason. They brought at the time the Turks, who eventually took they were trying to avoid the kingdom being taken from them and given to the rightful ones, Ahlul Bayt, and by trying to prevent it, they fell into it in another way. They gave it away to the Turks, who eventually became the Ottomans, who became the Khulafa after them. Nonetheless, in their attempt to control the Imam, they would often summon him. One night, and again I wanted to keep it brief, one night this cursed Mutawakkil in a drunken state, not in a normal state, but as it was known about them that they would drink and they would have gatherings of sin and drinking. In a drunken state, he asked for the Imam to be summoned to his castle, to be brought to his basically gathering. La'natullah alayh. So then they, obviously his guards and so on, they went to the house of the Imam, and they kept them very close. The Imam was pretty close to where he was residing. They brought the Imam to his gathering, to his court, and he sat the Imam right next to him, and he offered the Imam what he was drinking, what he was consuming, la'natullah alayh. Obviously the Imam said to him that this never mixes with our blood, it never enters our body. You cannot impose this, or this is by no means something you could offer us, Ahlul Bayt. He knew that this is not something that the Imam would share with him. He said, well, in our gatherings we have poetry, and so sometimes people say poetry, and you come from a family of very eloquent, very educated people, so you should know some poetry, so I want you to say some poetry for us. The Imam initially said to him, I am not the type of person who participates in this kind of gathering. Let me go. If you have some question for me, you summon me to your court. You have questions, go ahead. If not, let me go and continue with my acts of worship and ibadah. He says, I insist. In other words, you have to do it. You have no choice. The Imam recited a poem in which everyone in that gathering were shedding tears, wearing basically tears and crying. It affected them, but only unfortunately for them, momentarily, very short-lived effects, and it went away perhaps with the effects of what they were drinking. As they went sober, the kingdom and the love of their castles and thrones overtook them, and again they continued on their path. Nonetheless, perhaps that poem is a lesson for us. I began with ayat from Surah Al-Fajr, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes how insan is unless we purify. He often tells us in the Holy Quran that as human beings we are in loss unless we purify, unless we become amongst the believers who purify. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. Victorious is he who purifies himself, his self, and the loser and one who would be disappointed on the Day of Judgment is he who does not purify, who betrays his nafs and his soul. In that sense, it's important for us to learn lessons from what the Imam shared. Insan by nature loves dunya. Insan by nature works for dunya. Insan by nature loves possessions of this dunya, loves to have more and more of this dunya. Numbers game, assets, properties, real estate, and so on. This is insan by nature. Insan by nature from childhood wants to have more. The children, you bring them, it's all about me first, me more. That's how they are. And that's how we are unless we purify. So the Imam reminds us of what is the end of all of this game of increasing and takathur. What happens in the end? He reminds all of these people. He says even the kings, the ones on the highest levels that had the best castles, oftentimes built on the highest positions of their cities, their mountains and elevations are considered to be safer, especially the summits, the peaks, the highest, in any area you go on the highest house in the hill, it has more value to people. They see it as one who has vision over the rest. Nobody has vision over them, and so on. He says, "Batu ala qulal al-ajbal tahrusuhum." They slept on the peaks of the mountains, and they were guarded with the strongest of men, none of which benefited them, none of which could save them. When death came to them, they were buried under this ground, and eventually it came to the point that the faces that used to be softened, oftentimes use all the creams and all the softeners and all the good things that they eat and use, consume to protect their bodies. What happened to them? It's nothing new, it happened from then. The Imam says, تِلْكَ الْوُجُوهِ أَيْنَ الْوُجُوهُ الَّتِي كَانَتْ مُنَعَّمَةً. Where are these faces that were softened and they had, protected them from the sun and the lotions and all of these things? He says, تِلْكَ الْوُجُوهُ عَلَيْهَا الدُّودُ يَقْتَتِلُ. On these faces, under the ground, the worms, the creatures that start coming when the skin and the muscles rot and they go bad and things start growing in them. The only thing that protects us is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Otherwise, this body and this physical appearance and whatever they earned, they left it behind them. The Imam says, and in that poem, the Imam describes, he says they had to leave everything behind. The money, the castles, all their guards, their wives, everything that they had, all these people around them, they had to leave them behind. And the body that they took care of, or they took so much care and focused on, now that body became the battleground of all sorts of creatures. We seek refuge to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from neglecting our soul, and we ask Him to grant us the wisdom and opportunity to focus on our soul and neglect, in that sense, secondary things, to know that they are secondary, including the body and all the worldly possessions. Not that we should not take care of ourselves, but realize and make sure that we have them in the right order of priorities. We ask Him to make us amongst those who listen to what's said and follow what's best. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu wa sallam ala sayyidina wa nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Allah.